Hello, world. It's me, Dennis, and welcome to Reasonably Spontaneous Conversation, LinkedIn Edition. And I'm having another conversation with my friend, Matthew Brackett. Hello, Matthew.
Hello, Dennis. Thank you very much for this spontaneous conversation.
Oh, it is my pleasure. Today, I want to go into history because one of the things that I understand is that all of us here on LinkedIn, we know we have our business persona and we have our personal persona, but they're all tied together. And so many of us have in our journey our spiritual paths as to what we are. And you, because you have been getting so much press lately, you've been going on so many podcasts and you've been talking about this. It's been such an important part. So I want to delve into your history. I want to learn something about you. And when did you decide to go into the priesthood? What was that impelling to? And you decided to go into the Catholic priesthood?
That's right. Yes,
And when was this? And what was going on in your mind about that? Could you share with us about it, please?
of course. And it's important. I want your viewers to know that this is totally spontaneous. We did, we didn't prepare any of this.
No, and this is why I want to have this because we're both of us, we've talked about how we've evolved in our conceptions of what this word God is and
Mm,
evolved over years as all of us do. So that's what I want to talk about is your evolution
right.
in this so that we can understand a little bit from what you were doing. Yeah.
So understand, I'm the 10th of 13 children. I grew up in a Catholic environment, in a very traditional Catholic environment where I went to school. I was very exposed to monastic life. I had an aunt and a cousin who were nuns. I then had brothers that joined the monastery as monks. Monks is sort of it's a life that you very much separated from the world, much more quiet, much more silence. The same thing, Buddhist monks, other types of monks, Catholic monks. There's similarities in the sense of the type of lifestyle. I had a brother who went to seminary in 1983. I was 10 years old. He joined a religious order to become a priest. By religious order, I mean you think Franciscans, Jesuits, Dominicans. So a religious order, it's sort of a religious family it's an international group. So that being said, I was very exposed to that growing up. Not that people have always asked me, did your parents push you in any direction? I never felt pushed by my parents. In fact, I think I caught them off guard when I decided to go to the seminary. But what they did do is make sure that we had exposure to different options.
Yes.
And so I would visit the seminary a lot as a young man. I lived at the monastery for a year when I was in 10th grade, and I'd visit this other religious order where my brother joined. I would visit them on occasions, and it was always attractive to me because there's hundreds of young people, young men dedicating their life. They were always enthusiastic, and they lived what I saw the gospel law of charity in such an attractive way for me. And it was an international organization, and they did a lot of good. So that was I liked that environment.
Yes.
Now, did I want to be a priest? No. Okay, so then I did a year of seminary in the high school. I went and I at the end I went home and I didn't go back. That was in 11th grade, and I caught a lot of people off guard because I just didn't go back, and because I didn't see myself. I finished my senior year in high school, and then after graduating from high school, I did a volunteer year with the religious order. As a young man, I didn't know what I wanted to go to school for. I didn't really know what I wanted to do with my life. I just knew I wanted to do something meaningful, impactful.
Right, but you were 18 years old. We have the hormones that are going through our brain. We have the maturity that we're barely beginning to go. And so how all of that is churning through and you're having to make these decisions.
Well, not that I was having to. I was just making them on the
Yes,
fly.
exactly. That's what I mean. You're
And
making
I
them. Yeah.
suppose I was around people that made decisions like that. So it didn't seem awkward.
Yeah.
Nowadays, especially in today's, yeah, they're big commitments, big decisions, and we look back and like, holy smokes. Yes, would I do it differently? Yeah, I would do it differently.
Well, perhaps a bit, but you're a different person now than you were
Right.
then. You can only, one of the expressions I love is that we made the best decisions that we could by the light
Mm-hmm.
we can see by.
That's right, by the light we had. And that's true. So do I regret it? No. And so so that's what I did. I did a volunteer year, and so was much more in that environment. And it was during that year that I began to not to think more, but I was sort of confronted with this.
Yes.
And I was confronted with you it was you have to do this.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know where that commitment or that duty was coming from. I don't know. It could have been just from me, from the high standards that I had for myself, and I was sort of putting the pieces of the puzzle together, and then it said, well, this must mean that this is what I should do. Again, it had a lot to do with the way I was raised and with this religious group in particular. They very much, it was, that God calls in all these different ways, and the sense of duty and commitment. And it was almost like, if you're here in this situation, then it means that you might. I disagree with that interpretation, but that was the way it was sort of
Yeah.
presented to me. And again, that's where at my young mind, that's when I thought, well, then must be what and the founder of that organization was very influential in my decision. And so it was actually it was December 7th. I had a conversation with him, 1991. And I asked him if I could join the seminary, and he said yes. And the interesting part of this conversation is, he said, why don't you wait until June, which was the normal month, or when people would begin what they would call candidacy, or when they would begin to discern if seminary was for them. And I said, no, if I wait, I probably won't do it. Now but anyways, that's what happened. And he said, all right, well then, because there's a saying in those environments, is that the moment of grace, it will pass by. Okay. And so it was sort of presented to us that if the call comes in a moment, and if you don't get it at that moment, you don't snatch it, then it won't come back. But again, that's not something that I would totally agree with.
Right, but it's something that you had at that time.
It
So
was
what
very
was
much part of how we were. And so then he said, all right, well then this is December. He said, all right, January.
Mhm.
January 3rd, the anniversary of when this organization was started. That's when you can receive what they would call the Cassette de Sultan and become one of us. And so that's what I did. I packed my bags. I was in Ireland at this time. Packed my bags. I went to Rome to visit my brother who was studying in Rome. I went there for a few days. Then I went home. I was at home for Christmas. I was home for 3 days, and then off I went to the seminary. So it happened very quickly. And I caught my parents off guard, I think. And then I remember my brother saying to me, "You sure you want to do this? It seems kind of quick." So, anyways, that's where it started. But I want to highlight that there was a great excitement about doing something exciting, adventurous, and wanting to do a lot of good. There was an undertone of a lot of duty and obligation in answering that call. It wasn't, and I can't say I wanted to do it. No.
Yeah.
In my diary, I wrote, "Oh, this is the beginning, and this is going to be tough." Then it grew on me a little bit.
Yeah.
But I sort of just came to the moment of just, this is accepting. This is, and I just didn't look back for a long time. Go ahead.
Matthew, what was your concept of God as you sat there and you said, did you see God as an out there being in some other place that you related to? Did you work through the ideas? What was that sense of this higher power and how this worked in your spiritual ideal?
Right. So at that age, I suppose I was raised, and I just grew up. It was more of a God who was distant, and sort of like a God who was all powerful, all knowing, almighty, distant, and kind of, we had that sense of that we had to please
Was
him.
it a personality? Did you see God as a personality, as an entity, individual?
Well, no, it was someone. This is sort of the disconnect sometimes in faith, but also in the Catholic faith, which the church has struggled with, is the personal relationship with God. Actually, I joined this religious group because they they emphasize that a lot more. Their personal relationship with Jesus, who they believe is the Son of God, right? So it was a very personal, and that attracted me. And because that wasn't something that I was sort of educated with. It was more a lot of fear-based, shame-based belief system, and that that it was what's the word? Again, we had to please this divine master,
Exactly.
in the
Exactly.
pleasing
And
him.
that was what, and that was something that just didn't click with me. I
Right.
couldn't, I couldn't get that. And I see that you were having those same senses too.
Right, and pleasing him would sort of make us happy. And that's again, it's a misconception of God and of faith. It's oftentimes the way it's portrayed, because I say that negative preaching or fear-based or shame-based preaching is the easiest type of preaching. As a, and being in ministry, I wouldn't take that style, but if I didn't, I decided when people didn't prepare anything to a message to give, they'd walk up and it would turn into fear-based or shame-based or very negative type of preach. You got to do this, you got to do this, sin, this, sin, that. Um, it's lazy preaching, I call it, but it's very common. So, and I don't think that's not the message that people need, and that doesn't nourish the soul and the heart, right? But the relationship, and so again, then that began the journey of a much more personal relationship in the way I viewed Jesus and the way I viewed God.
I was seeing one of the things that I've always connected with when I think of when I have had that relationship with Jesus, as I've been thinking about, is that I've always thought, okay, well, in my understanding, Jesus is my brother. I mean, I think of, when we think of, the idea that we have that Jesus the Savior, but everything that I read about, the words that would come down, or at least have been interpreted the way I said, is that I am family, that it is my brother. And while he might be an elder brother and one who has made it all the way to the full at-one-ment, the atonement, it's still, I have that brotherhood with him,
Mhm.
and I can relate on that level more than I can relate as a separate. Does that at all resonate?
It does, yes. Brotherhood and friendship was something that resonated a lot.
Exactly.
It's friendship with in Jesus, who came as a representation, or as not that's the wrong theological word, but for lack of a better word,
Hmm.
uh, Jesus was the representation of God, right? Who came to walk with us,
Yeah.
and I think that's such a fascinating belief. It is that God loved us so much that he came to walk with us. He was born like us. He cried like us. He had to change his diapers like us. He suffered with us. He cried. He went through all the stages of growth. And and that's just a beautiful thing, God with us, God who walks with us. So in that sense, Jesus is, yes, he's a friend, he's a brother, he's a companion on the journey. And we just see the way he dealt with those he walked with, where he was firm in certain moments, but he had such a special place in his heart for those who were distant, for those that didn't see or didn't understand, for those that were suffering. He had a very special place for those, and especially those who were humble, and those who had faith, who had an openness to believe.
And now you went out, and so you continued in the priesthood. So you were ordained in the priesthood, and
Yes.
as a Catholic priest, under what order? Were you a Franciscan or a Jesuit, or what? How does that work within the Catholic? What
Right.
was your
So
path?
I received ordination to the priesthood. I was with the Legionaries of Christ.
Which means
So,
what?
which
Who are
I
they?
so I don't talk a lot about this on podcasts. So it's an organization that was started in 1941.
Hmm.
And it's an organization of priests, but there's also lay people that are also involved in a larger family, what they call the Regnum Christi. Canonically, they call it a federation, and they're very much about education of culture, evangelization of culture. A very dynamic organization through education, through the family, and to really and through leadership. They do a lot of work with people in leadership roles, is to evangelize culture. That's what it's about. It's an international organization.
What does evangelize culture mean? I've not heard that term.
Right. Yes. That's a good. I've had to think about that because I use it so often, but I'm not sure it means. Evangelism coming from the word gospel, to bring the
Yes.
gospel, to infuse the gospel into culture. So to bring values of the gospel, to bring,
Ah,
that would be the simplest way to say it, to bring the values of
sure.
the gospel into culture.
Yes, and that's one of the things that what I'm seeing now is we're looking at our culture, and we're seeing a lot of Christian nationalism, and I'm looking at, okay, well, how are we living? How are the Christian nationalists living the principles of Jesus? Assuming that it's that this is so how do those things work together? And that's what you're talking about bringing the culture and bringing the culture so we're actually living the values
Yes.
that are there,
And
correct?
it's
Do I
living the
understand
values.
that
Yes.
correctly?
Yes. And it's not about making everyone Catholic. It's about just bringing those Judeo-Christian values and roots into society because it's in the end, there's a lot of goodness in them.
Yes.
Right. So, and it's
Now, did
carrying.
you have a different, do you have a difference in your sense now of, because we talk about the Judeo-Christian values in there, but and when we talk about the Hindu values and the Muslim values and the Rastafarian values, the different these principles, it appears to me anyway that there are principles that are underlying that go down below the religions, that the religion is like a version of an interpretation of basic principles, and
Mm,
there are different interpretations that people will then gravitate toward, however we
right.
have either familial or societal, but below those principles are the solid places of love and compassion and growth and community, and those things underpin much of our work. Do you see that as the same way?
I do see that. Yes. If you go across in just religion across the world and even the birth of religion, it's so interesting because part of it all aims to the fact that the human being longs for something more, what we would call the transcendent. So there's this yearning and longing in the human heart for something more. And that took on very many expressions in throughout the human race. Right. And that's why going way back, when they would look at nature and they would see, this is much more powerful than me. This must be a god. That's why they had so many gods, because that's what they related to. And so, with the thunder, the lightning, the rain, the earth, the sun, the nature, the trees.
Yeah.
And so, and then there was this whole thing of when they felt that the gods were angry at them, and then they had to appease the gods, right? And but then and that goes with the Greeks, with the Romans, you go to the
Of
different,
course, it makes so much sense.
a lot across Latin America, right? It was there trying to understand nature, right? And the cosmos. It's fascinating. But the fact is that there was this yearning and this desire and this for the transcendent, right? And how I saw that is expressed in different ways across the different faiths. But you're right. The idea is that you live for more, and so how can I live for more in a
Yeah.
more dignified manner? And
And so
and
now,
the
I mean,
goodness of the person, right? As
exactly.
you said, yes.
So you see this in here in 2023, as you're going into your coaching practice. When you tell, what was your decision? How did you arrive at your decision that you were going to leave the priesthood and to become and to continue your ministry? Because one of the things that I feel so strongly about is that you continued your ministry. You never stopped that. Your ministry continues, whether it's your coaching and whether or not the work you're doing, you're still spreading the light. You're still bringing that. You have, every time I'm around you, I feel such a strong sense of connection to my source, to connection to the peace and the wholeness within me. It's such a powerful example. But you had to decide to change that vocation and make that decision to leave the priesthood and go that. What was that like?
That's Thank you, then, and thank you for your goodness. It was a decision that I did not take lightly, and it took me a long time to get there. As with big decisions in life, oftentimes they're caused by pain. So little by little, there was brewing inside of me this crisis of identity. and also discontent. And then I didn't know how to deal with it. I didn't know what was going on. And again, I just, I grew up in that environment. I probably didn't evolve in certain ways. I evolved in many other ways, but there's other things that I think was my growth was stunted. Um, and so I was, I don't know how old, maybe 35 or whatever, that when I started to have to face these things, but I didn't have the tools and skills to, and so I didn't know what to do. And so someone defined depression as anger turned inwards. And I think that's sort of, and I resonated with that because I get sort of angry with life and with myself. And because I began to have very unhealthy expressions of this discontent where I didn't, and I wasn't happy with the unhealthy expressions that I was having, right? That didn't align with my ministry, with my commitments, right? Where we had vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience. And I didn't think I was living any of those very well, right? And I'm also a person with high standards, and so I just didn't meet the standards that I had for myself, and that I felt that the church
Exactly.
was
And
setting for
boy,
me.
boy, does that set up a conflict when
Right,
we have our internal values and we're not meeting them and we're doing that. Oh my goodness, I
right,
got that.
and then then the church sets up these, it's a very idealistic lifestyle, the part of religious life and the priestly life, very
Hmm.
beautiful.
Hmm.
But the fact is, it's a high ideal.
Yep.
Right. And so, when the ideal and the real when there's a huge distance, we can call that frustration and disappointment, right? The tension is so important in the human life that there is a tension, but when it becomes way out of zone, then it becomes
Actually,
very,
you're
very
right.
difficult.
I mean, it's out of scope. I mean,
Right.
you
So I
don't, and so
sat with
you
that.
had to realign. Yeah,
I did. So I sat and then and I started. I remember in 2015, I got a personality, I got a deep psychological assessment into where I was at in life. And that really brought a lot to the surface for me because it reframed or it framed my whole situation in a much larger context that made sense. And that was the first time I thought, well, maybe I'm just not in the right place. And rather than just, saying there's something wrong with me, maybe it's just this lifestyle isn't fitting. Um, so again, so that's 2015. I didn't end up leaving ministry until 2021. Right. So, but I took a year off in 2017 then. So with that journey, I began to discover a lot of things and work a lot on myself. I took a year sabbatical. So much so I did inpatient care because I needed some deep work in a safe environment where I was sort of disconnected from the institutional church, where I could look at myself with honesty and without pressures. Very challenging to do, but it became very fruitful. So
the
during that year, I
courage that
felt,
it takes to do that, Matthew. I
right,
am so honored to that you share that with us. You know,
thank
the
you.
courage for you to be able to look at yourself and spend some time and go, okay, what am I doing? What's going on?
Right. It was hard, but I did it, and I call that year the year of coming home to myself because I think I'd lost myself along the journey, again with all the best intentions, but I had lost myself along the journey and I was coming home to myself. I spent the year with my dad, because I had been away from home. As you know, I worked overseas for all of those years, right? So I was away from family. I missed a lot of great events. I was like, I want to go back home and come home to myself and figure this out. So then I stepped back into ministry, and that's when I stepped into as a chaplain with the Navy and the Marines, and that was probably one of the best decisions I made because it was such a fascinating experience. I learned so much, I grew so much, and I did that. For me, it was a thing of honesty. I said I kind of knew in my heart that this might not be for me, but I wanted to give it another try. I wanted to try it on again, and that's what I did. And the answer kind of became clear to me that it wasn't my place, even though it was so meaningful. And so, yes, I finished my active duty. I finished ministry. Then you receive what you call dispensation, or you resign, and all that was in July of 2021. And then that's when I started a master's degree in the psychology of leadership at Penn State, and then I started my practice, which I'm slowly building of coaching people in leadership roles, how they lead themselves, how they lead others. Leadership it's such an important thing for me because as John Maxwell says, everything rises and falls on leadership. Leadership, when well exercised, whether it be in the family, whether it be in an organization, whether it be in a church, when it's well practiced, it is so life-giving to people. But when it is not exercised properly in an unhealthy or dysfunctional way, it's so harmful. It's so harmful. It does so much damage. And then when you add that to the church or to spirituality, to faith, oh, the damage goes a lot deeper.
God, how wonderful. Well, see, this is what I want to do. On our next Reasonably Spontaneous Conversation LinkedIn edition, could we center it on leadership and the concepts and some of the principles of leadership, some of the anecdotes that you've had and some of the things that you've learned, both from the military, from great leadership and small leadership. Can we have that conversation the next time?
Of course we can. I would love to have that conversation.
Because leadership is such, I agree with you, that our opportunity to be able to lead and to be able to have the kind of growth together. This is our opportunity. This is our opportunity to be able to say, okay, how can I release from you the greatness that is already there? And that to me is one of the great definitions of leadership, is because it's actually bringing people and setting them up for success. I see that in athletics. I see this in business, and I see it in NGOs and not for profits. But that's where we want to talk, because Matthew, I think you have so much of what I want and what I want to be able to build as I'm building this wonderful friendship with you, as we're building this series of reasonably spontaneous conversations that we get a chance to collaborate with.
Thank you. Yes, we'll talk about that next time. I love that.
All right. Thank you. And thank you everyone here on LinkedIn for joining us for my second LinkedIn edition of Reasonably Spontaneous Conversation with Matthew Brackett. Thank you for watching and listening, and we'll see everybody next time.
This episode of Reasonably Spontaneous Conversations has been brought to you in part by In Search of the New Compassionate Male. For more information, go to newcompassionatemale.com.